works. 1, 2, yes. Okay, I think this works. Hello there. Welcome to the first ever stream that I'm gonna do. As we agreed, and thankfully you voted, this is gonna be a sober stream, which is fine by me. And actually, I would much more enjoy it this way. And first things first, let's check if the technicals are in order. Write in the chat if you can hear me, or if you are in the chat at all or not. Otherwise, I'm just gonna, in a second, check on my own in the other window. But obviously, it's easier to see if you just write it down. So what's today's plan? Okay, volume is good. Perfect. All right, so first things first, let's talk about what do we expect to get from this stream, what kind of interactions are we going to discuss, and what's our end goal. Firstly, this is obviously a test stream and to see how I am as a role as a live action person, because so far most of my videos been me stumbling up 10 times upon trying to say a certain phrase and then deleting it in post, and then being all nice and smooth and so on. But we're gonna see how it turns out to be in a live version. And secondly, I'm not expecting there to be a lot of people in the stream. I was actually considering that there's not gonna be any. So I'm gonna be using this stream to cover some topics that took longer for me to think about. And I was actually considering what kind of video I should make around it. And we're going to be looking today at the speech that Putin gave at the start of the war that basically kicked off this whole shebang with the invasion and now partial occupation of Ukraine. We're basically going to go point by point, fact by fact that he makes, and I'm going to try to discuss, and maybe we'll be able even to debunk live. I'm not expecting that we're going to provide 100% proof for everything he said right away, because most of the accurate truths are coming like after a certain research, and there might people then come up with counterpoints, which is again very valid. But we're going to talk about what is fundamentally wrong with this, and then as we go along, I encourage everyone to ask questions into the chat. I will read them and answer them. I'm also expecting, if we get very lucky to boost our stream, we're going to get some inflow of Russian trolls and bots, and then this stream is going to get up in ratings, and then more people will see it later on. I encourage you to not be surprised by it, and we're just going to see if this is going to be too hard for us to deal with this, and then we'll figure out something around that point. But all in all, this is intended to basically answer your questions live for people who want, and me then basically doing a reaction type video on what Putin said in his speech kicking off this whole invasion. Hi, greetings. Wow, Luciana, isn't this too early for you? Wow, amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much. Actually, I was very surprised that a lot of my audience is coming from US. That was extremely surprising, right? I'm a European, obviously, but and I was expecting that more of the Europeans would get engaged, but I guess Ukraine is a more popular topic in US because US is such a strong allies. And talking about strong allies, I'm gonna mention a couple of things that I talked about about my last video. So I was not completely clear about what is the message that I wanted to send with the video that I made when I took a very pessimistic outlook, because the total message that I wanted to give is that despite the most down to ground, like completely pessimistic outlook, Ukraine still have a lot of friends, and there are very niche concrete scenarios that can maybe stall or give edge for the Russians to be in a position of strength if we come to negotiations. And I just wanted to underscore there is very little chance for Ukraine to lose essentially this war in a global sense. Obviously, there's still going to be a lot of lives lost of Ukrainians, so it's a personal tragedy for every person in Ukraine. And just today, I've read a lot about how hard it is on the front lines for Ukrainian soldiers, because all our great discussion right here about how strategically significant certain maneuvers are, for the people on the ground, it is still just being shells and bombs dropped and their comrades dying. It is a very, very nasty war, but we're trying to look at this in some kind of a more of a maybe takeaway approach. There's a lot of really good channels, and I should recommend them, that give more personal if you're into kind of this. But I'm trying to encourage just to follow and see where we are in a general sense and explain it in simple terms, so people that, like me, have a job would still be able to follow through. Oh, greetings from Germany. Greetings to Germany. I've actually have a lot of really good things to say about Germany in my next video. So to compensate for the previous video that I made, very negative one, I'm actually going to make another video, but now I'm going to look at a more optimistic one, because let me just say, right after I finished recording, right after I uploaded the video and people started making comments, I did a little bit of research on what is the latest news around the topics that I was discussing, and I was pleasantly surprised. First and foremost, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into what I'm talking about. Let me just switch to this camera right here. So I'm just going to use my incognito mode window right here. And basically, I wanted to ask, right, one of the big leverages that Putin is expecting to have during the winter is that he's going to blackmail Europe for the gas. So if Europe will not have the gas for the winter, then Europe is going to be in a vulnerable position, and therefore it is it can be influenced by Putin. But if we look to this amazing graph by Reuters, where they explain essentially what is the target for European storage facilities to be essentially ready for winter. So by the October 1st, Europe needs to get around 80% of their storage facilities full to essentially get through the winter, maybe with some saving of their performance, so saving some of the spendings. This is the part that I would cut out if I would do it in post. So saving some of their spending of the gas, but still get through. However, what we are seeing is, if we go scroll down and we see it break down by the country, and I'm having my picture here, so I'm just going to move this so you can see all the countries. So you can see that pretty much all the countries are pretty much in a safe zone. There is very little, like, I think obviously the ones that we'll need to look at the most is the top line here. Oh, I don't have my paint tool because it's an incognito window. Well, I guess no scribbling for me this time. Hi, greetings to UK. So we see that Germany, France, Italy, well, only Netherlands is under the target of 80%. But all in all, this means that getting a leverage on European countries during the winter is going to be nigh impossible for Putin. And that was one of the major arguments when we when we discussed the pessimistic scenario and coloring them more of a red. That was basically the major parts. And the ones that are having the worst is probably Hungary. Well, Hungary, we know Hungary. And Latvia. Latvia here is in the Baltics, but I think for the Baltics, it's a principal position to be against Russia. So I don't think it matters for them that much how much they're going to suffer, because they will still be against Putin. But enough of me talking. I don't really want to go in details too much in this. Just know that we will have another video and we're going to discuss things more deeply. I'm not sure if we want to discuss the situation on the front lines. There's not much things that changed. Let me just say, yeah, no, I just want to take everything. Yes. So on the front lines, nothing major changed, just to kind of start off the stream. Can LNG from Canada make up for Russian gas? Yes, yes. Liquefied natural gas can definitely make up, mostly because there's still supplies coming in from Russia, and it's going to take time to increase the liquefied natural gas supply. And because the storage facilities for the gas is already full for Europe, that means that there's going to be basically a hole up to next winter, like not coming winter, but the winter after is going to be time to grow the supply for the liquefied natural gas. So I'm expecting this to definitely be a big saving grace in the year to come, maybe 2023. As a country, you can fill it fast and easy. Yeah, fair enough. I'm pretty sure that even the countries, if they're going to be really struggling for the performance of the basic functions, I hope that Europeans will still share some of the gas supplies. So talking quickly over the map, because I know that this is something we just need to cover. Nothing much is happening. The Russians are extremely stalled, but we have some news about where this special corps, this new Third Army Corps is coming in, because that's pretty much what's going to give the biggest impact for the front line in the coming months, I would say. And it seems that they are being right now around this area here, so right towards the south. It is unclear because I've heard, unfortunately I cannot draw. This is annoying, actually. I'm so used to drawing. Maybe can I? Nah, okay. Never mind. But the point is that it seems that we're going to have them grouped somewhere around Rostov. So from here, they can either go south towards Crimea, or they can go here towards this direction. And it is split. The analysts that I've been listening to, they still do not agree where these extra forces will come in. But they are saying that it might be towards direction of where actually, surprisingly, Pisky. And Pisky, by the way, again, is mostly taken by the Russians. It's a back and forth, nothing completely determined yet, but we should expect that Russians are going to be starting to claim again that they've taken Pisky again. So, but if they indeed took Pisky, then these forces might come into this direction. Or obviously the second one is that people are saying that they might come into this direction, into Zaporizhia direction, so they can do the counteroffensive. I was thinking, and I think that most probably it would make sense for them to come in this direction, but this is my logic, and this is analysts maybe know better. But the point is that Russians, by these attacks on Donbass, Russians are trying to get the forces out of Kherson area and towards Donbass. So putting some extra pressure in Donbass will most definitely take the pressure off the Kherson region. And that will allow Russia to prolong this conflict, to make Ukrainians send the troops there and back, and therefore creating this visual perception of this being a frozen conflict. It's not going to work for them because there is already news saying the opposite of what we've discussed in our pessimistic video, but wait for the next optimistic video that I'm going to make hopefully tomorrow. So just wanted to mention this. Otherwise, nothing changed. Like, the front line is pretty much stable. There is obviously still artillery fire. Both directions, Ukrainians are destroying Russian forces are shooting at Ukrainian forces. It's a war, surprising absolutely no one. But no major advancements anywhere. There are some threatening positions, but nothing is going on. And now we finally come to the actual star of the show, if I can call him that. We're going to listen. It's going to be an hour speech by Putin. I hope we can get through the whole hour speech, but we'll see how far we get. Otherwise, either I'm going to record the ending later on, or we're going to have a secondary stream maybe next week. But all things considered, I'm pretty sure that we can cover most of it, because I don't expect to go deep in depth and discussing certain points to the actual nitty-gritties. But you're welcome to comment. You're welcome to ask the questions about the stream, about anything unrelated. I'm here for you. Let's get on with this.
Уважаемые граждане России, дорогие друзья, Тема моего выступления
It's a
– события на Украине.
reactionary content.
И то, почему это так важно для нас, для России.
There you go.
Конечно, мое обращение адресовано и нашим соотечественникам на Украине.
So this is still the time when it's been discussed that Ukrainians and Russians, Putin has made some, how do you say, not statements he posted on the Kremlin's website, like essays, where he described that there is historically and culturally Ukrainians and Russians were essentially one people. And this is before they got smashed in the face by the Ukrainian resistance. So here he is still under very heavy illusion that there is a significant number of people in Ukraine that will welcome him with open arms.
Говорить придется обстоятельно и подробно. Вопрос очень серьезный. Ситуация на Донбассе вновь приобрела критический острый характер.
So this speech was recorded pre-invasion to Ukraine. It was recorded on 21st of February. And around that time was, hi, greetings to France. But this is the situation where in a timeline, they already started mobilizing the forces inside of the Donbass region. And it was already clear that when they stated, by 21st of February, they still were not explicitly stating in which borders the Donbass region is going to get recognized. They already said that we are recognizing the breakaway regions, as they call it, temporary occupied territories as what we should call it. And they're stating that they are recognizing those temporary occupied regions, but it was not clear in which borders. This is when they're recording. So they already know, he already knew by that point that what he's going to do. So all of that was, again, just a complete, how do you say, like lies. Let's just call it lies. You know what I'm talking about.
И сегодня обращаюсь к вам напрямую, чтобы не только дать оценку происходящему, но и проинформировать вас о принимаемых решениях, о возможных дальнейших шагах на этом направлении. Еще раз подчеркну, что Украина для нас – это не просто соседняя страна. Это неотъемлемая часть нашей собственной истории, культуры, духовного пространства.
So again, he's starting very much by underscoring how Ukraine and Russia is basically a combined cultural and historic space. This is important because
это наши товарищи, близкие, среди которых не только коллеги, друзья, бывшие сослуживцы, но и родственники, люди, связанные с нами кровными семейными узами. Издавна жители юго-западных исторических древнерусских земель называли себя русскими и православными.
So this comes to his first point. Maybe I'm going to start clipping this after the stream and start discussing these points one by one. So first point is coming here. So he's starting by building this. We have a same cultural heritage. We are essentially the same religion with same essentially Russian Christians. This is very important because he doesn't state that, well, Ukraine, you are about to join NATO and about to attack us. It wasn't as a first thing he started mentioning. So first he started saying something about...
Так было и до 17 века, когда часть этих территорий воссоединилась с российским...
I'm just going to quickly remind that Russian Federation that exists now is not a continuation of the Russian Empire. It is not the same state. It has no, how do you say, like a direct link to that state. One might say, yes, it's the same territory and there are some people that were there, but there has been a very difficult history about who is ruling on that territory, and the Soviet mixed up everything. So the current Russian Federation is not a continuation of the Russian Empire. However, there is an argument, obviously, about the cultural ties.
Государством и после. Нам кажется, что в принципе мы все об этом знаем, что речь идет об общеизвестных фактах. Вместе с тем, для понимания того, что же все-таки сегодня происходит, для объяснения мотивов действий России и тех целей, которые мы перед собой ставим, нужно хотя бы несколько слов сказать об истории вопроса. Итак, начну с того, что современная Украина целиком и полностью была создана Россией.
Okay, so we got our first claim. And the claim is that the modern Ukraine was entirely created by Russia, or to be more precise, by Bolshevik communist Russia. And here we can already start discussing why is this true or not true. Firstly, what do we understand by this? If we understand, do we mean the current borders of Ukraine? Then it's kind of true, because, yeah, I know he's delusional, I know, but delusional or not, but this is the guy that basically started this biggest war in Europe since the Second World War. It's the guy, because tens of thousands of people are dying because he's delusional. So I think it's really relevant to talk about his delusion and why would anyone believe it. There is still plenty of people in the West that they think that, oh, Russia is just defending itself because NATO was about to invade it. Like Ukraine was, no, it's like, it's the best theory. Ukraine was about to join NATO and then invade Russia, and then Russia would attack Ukraine, and then NATO would had to intervene, and that way NATO would be forced to fight Russia. That was the plan of Ukraine. Like I've read it all, but still, it's important to talk about what he's actually meaning, what he actually meant to do. What is the actual goal? Well, I don't think he has a goal. I think he just wanted like an easy ride and just get what he wants. But important here is to talk about the fact that the statement that Ukraine was created by the communists is not true. It's a country that came out of territories of the USSR. Fair. But other countries did as well. The countries that got occupied by the USSR did not came on the other end with the same borders as they got in. We can look at the Poland, we can look at Belarus, we can look at other countries that were before USSR occupied them or captured them. Some of the countries got it really bad. Like if you look, for example, at the Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? They still have the disputes in between them about the land and how it was separated in the USSR. So I do not think that he means exactly just the simple borders. So I think instead what he's saying is that there is Bolsheviks that thought that Ukraine is an entity in itself. So then the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian population is a part of the USSR. We can talk about, yes, maybe administrative borders was not the same, but it is true for all of the other countries. So that's obviously a complete fallacy. And Ukrainian people, we definitely know that they were happened before. I'm actually just gonna, we might Google, but I think the best thing, if you want to check this out, is the, I think it was Kings and Generals. And it's a historian channel on Kings and Generals with super amazing quality of production. And they actually, was it not Kings and Generals? Yeah, it was Kings and Generals. So you see they have these Rise of Cossacks, and I'm pretty sure if you look in the playlist, they will have, they have like Russian invasion in Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure they cover the, no, this is the invasion. But they also have a playlist for Project Ukraine. There we go. They have like a lot of these videos where they basically go over historical facts that led to the creation of Ukraine as an entity. And they basically explain that how the people became independent from the, and with their own nationality. But I think the most important thing to kind of stop here and go over to his next point is that it doesn't matter who created a country. Half of the countries in Africa or in Middle East have been artificially created. That doesn't make that doesn't mean that they're lesser countries. They are still countries. So it does not matter. There is no justification for war into how the country was made. It doesn't matter. So we'll just go into the next point.
Точнее, большевистской, коммунистической России. Этот процесс начался практически сразу после революции 1917 года. Причем Ленин и его соратники делали это весьма...
So, I mean, he's literally saying that Lenin created Ukraine. I don't know what to say. Lenin was actually a very small player in the revolution, as far as I'm aware. He, like when I read some of the historians about the role of Lenin in the revolution, and it was actually not that significant in the actual revolution that kicked off. But the point still stands that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it was Lenin. The whole point is completely nonsensical from the get-go. It could have been Lenin, which it wasn't, but it doesn't matter.
грубым по отношению к самой России способом. За счет отделения, отторжения от нее части.
Now, historically, Russian lands. And this is important because here he's saying that some lands are historically Russian. This is a direct claim. So this goes beyond the fact that the country was created by Lenin. Because historical appeal is not justification to again invade any kind of country. The aggressive expansion of a historic way is an actual fascist rhetoric, right? This was what kicked off the Second World War. This was what kicked it, is that there was historic land for Germans in Poland, there, or in Austria, or in Poland, or in parts of Czechoslovakia at that point. That rhetoric has been already debunked by multiple times. It has no rightful claim. It might have been land that there was part of some country at some point, but it's not anymore. With that logic, the UK then has the right to invade United States and say, well, you were ours at some point ago, therefore war. Yeah, it's the best Hitler impressions he could have done. So at this point, this is not even funny. So he says, Lenin created Ukraine, but it was part of Russia, therefore I have the right to come in and kill everyone.
У миллионов людей, которые там проживали, конечно, никто ни о чем не спрашивал.
Okay, so the millions of people lived in that territory in 1917, I would assume. That's what he's referring to. And we must be clear that after the war, the Second World War went over that territory, I should have bought myself a glass of water. But after the Second World War went over that territory, a lot of population changed. There has been also Stalin's Holodomor that killed a lot of the native Ukrainian population in that area. And obviously the statistics back then were not as accurate as it is. So showing statistics, I'm not sure if this is a good usage. There are some historians that are very thorough with what kind of statistics are being shown. And they're saying that, yes, in these lands, there were people that identified themselves as Ukrainians. There was plenty of them, and then the Soviets came, and then they kind of replaced it, and so on. And we know that all of these things happened, right? There were people that were identifying as Ukrainians, and then they were taken out by Stalin, sent to Siberia. All of these happens. It does not matter. Historical argument does not matter. Russian Federation is not a continuation of historic Russia. It is not continuation of the Soviet Union, because if it's a continuation of Soviet Union, that Soviet Union was the one that supposedly created Ukraine. Therefore, by the fact that the Soviet Union created it and being continuation of Soviet Union, the current Russia, that means you should have accepted what was created by the same Soviet Union.
Затем, накануне и после Великой Отечественной войны уже Сталин присоединил к СССР и передал Украине некоторые земли, ранее принадлежавшие Польше, Румынии и Венгрии.
Yeah, something that's actually very, very true, and this is actually something that very much happens in a lot of not just Russian propaganda, but in a lot of like common Russian things. You know my stance on the common Russians. I think that they bear a lot of responsibility, and I really want to make a video about Russia. And I think I figure out the concept. I know I've promised this video for a while now, but I think I finally figure out the concept of how I can talk about Russia. And this is the concept that they think that the Second World War started in 1941 rather than in 1939. Because in 1939, with the secret pact of Molotov-Ribbentrop, they divided the spheres of influence in Europe, and Germany and Russia, they attacked Poland from both sides, and they split it in half. Also, Russia taking the Baltic states shortly after. And then it happened before 1941. However, when Russians are talking about the Second World War, they are actually not referring very often to the Second World War. They are referring to something that they call the Great Patriotic War. The difference being the Great Patriotic War for them started in 1941. If you look at most of the monuments in Europe to the Russian soldiers in the Second World War that were built by the Soviets, you will see that the dates of the war state 1941 to 1945. They completely ignore the part in which the Soviet Union was the aggressor. And this is completely indulged in also the logic of a lot of Russian-speaking people and Russian people as well. Even right now, for example, in the Baltics right now, there's big movement to remove a lot of the Soviet monuments right now, and there's a lot of discussion around it. And one of the major things is that they're saying you are removing the history of saving you from the German occupiers. The problem is, if a saviors came in and then reoccupied, those are not saviors, those are reoccupiers. It's a very different things. And in the sense of pre-1941, it was the Soviets came in, occupied, so the Soviets were the occupiers, then Germans rolled in, deoccupied, occupiers and occupied, and then the Soviets deoccupied, deoccupiers, and occupied the same land again. It does not like, it's like two wrongs doesn't make a right. That's the funniest thing, and that is extremely important to understand whenever we're talking with some kind of persons that are understanding, like from the Russian speaker society, not so much of the Westerners that are following the Russian propaganda, but the actual Russian speakers. For a lot of them, whenever we're saying, well, Germany got defeated, the fascism was defeated, they do not look the period from 1931 and 1939 to 1941. For them, that period is pretty much absent. They do not recognize it.
При этом, в качестве своего рода компенсации, Сталин наделил Польшу частью исконных германских территорий. А в 1954 году Хрущев зачем-то...
That is partially true. That is actually partially true. So Crimea was always the very special case because it was the muddiest one, and that is one of the reasons why we in the West underreacted so much, because it's such a muddy situation, because there is a seed of truth to that. Crimea was not originally part of Ukrainian land. So when the Soviet Union essentially captured Ukraine in Ukrainian land and claimed it for itself, the Soviet Union, I'm stating, Crimea was technically not part of Ukraine. What happened is because Crimea is physically linked to Ukraine, it was then essentially handed over to Ukrainian administrative part, and then some parts on the east of Ukraine was actually moved to the like Russia proper region. So there was somewhat of an exchange. So some land essentially went to Ukraine, and some other land went to then the Russia proper. And this is the part that is very often completely missed, that Ukraine was a lot more expansive towards the east, as stated before. But what is interesting is that it doesn't matter. It does not matter who gave it out to be. The land was given, the recognition of the land was there, the treaties were signed, and not treaties that were in the Soviet Union, not treaties that were signed by some imperial Russia that recognized Ukraine as this, that are claimed. No. The treaty of the current Russian Federation state recognized sovereignty of Ukraine within the borders. And in that statement, the sovereignty of Ukraine was recognized by the Russian Federation that is current. And it doesn't matter what is the history of the country. As soon as the country is recognized in international law, that's it. So one might say, well, but there's been a lot of Russian-speaking population in Crimea. That is fair. Most of it was because Ukrainians was very nice. You know that Ukrainians were so nice that Crimea was actually an autonomous region. It was a region with a lot of self-governance. They were basically given all the rights to manage themselves as they would essentially please. Because there is like not just Russians that are living there, that was actually very forcefully brought into that region, because most of their local actual inhabitants were the Crimean Tatars, which are Muslims, and actually super nice people. And Crimean Tatars, let's just say they don't go well with a lot of Russian governments, because repressions, surprising absolutely no one, Stalin also did repressions on the Crimean Tatars. And this is sometimes that is a lot of times, not a lot of times, but this is something that Putin completely ignores. He says there were Russians in Crimea, therefore Crimea is historically Russian. That is a false narrative. There were Russians that were massively brought into the region during the Soviet times, while the other local population was then driven out. Therefore, there was a lot of Russians post-Soviet Union, and Ukraine was nice enough to not essentially bring a lot of the Ukrainian influence into the land, but rather be nice and forgiving and give autonomy to the region. And that autonomy, that goodwill, was then essentially now being turned around by this statement. It's essentially turning it on its head. Russia is taking about Alaska and taking it back from America. Yeah. I mean, well, they sold it. So, to be honest, that's even worse. Russians speaking about Alaska, that's just silly. It was just a land that they sold, and it wasn't even, I think, colonized back then. It was discovered, but not really colonized, so they don't even have like a cultural claim.
Отобрал у России Крым и тоже подарил его Украине. Собственно, так и сформировалась территория советской Украины.
Okay, so this is important. Let me just hear this.
Так и сформировалась территория советской Украины.
So he says modern Ukraine. So in translation, he says modern Ukraine. But when he's actually speaking, he says that's how the territory of the Soviet Ukraine was formed. Again, so he's referring to the Soviet Ukraine. So essentially the creation of Lenin, as he's referring to it. Again, doesn't really matter. It could have been creation by anyone, because in the Soviet Union, the Republic was, again, a state, a semi-independent state, technically, because in actuality, it's obviously all was controlled from the Moscow, and none of the republics have had any meaningful autonomy up until the late 1980s. And then once they got autonomy, whoa, it suddenly broke down and broke apart. How did this happen? Whoa.
Украине. Но сейчас хотел бы обратить особое внимание на начальный период создания СССР. Считаю, что для нас это крайне важно.
this is actually interesting because he's speaking so much about the USSR and creation of USSR. So this is interesting because Putin is also known as a person who spoke that one of the biggest geopolitical tragedies of the 20th century was the breakdown of the USSR. And he has a lot of love for USSR, but I think not in a way that we were thinking, like not as a cultural way. A lot of the people in the West that, for example, that are very anti-American or anti-capitalist, that are leaning towards like the left side of the spectrum, really love referring to USSR because it was a big socialist project, which it was not. It was more of a like authoritarian regime with a little bit of nice socialist flavor, but the in a sense of that the USSR was the dominant power. I think this is what he's more referring to and what he likes.
Пойти придется, что называется, издалека. Напомню, что после Октябрьского переворота 1917 года и последовавшей затем гражданской войны большевики приступили к строительству новой государственности. И между ними возникли довольно острые разногласия. Сталин, который в 1920...
You know that they're called Bolsheviki, which in direct translation means the bigger guys or like the majority guys. But the fact is that they used essentially the propaganda tactic because it was essentially one single... I don't remember everything. I'm really bad with memory, but there was this unified party before that, and when essentially they started talking about the revolution, then they actually ended up being like a minority in that party when they split up. And this minority of the party actually called themselves the majority. So they used essentially the same propaganda tactics that Russia is using now back in 1917 or something. It was very hilarious.
В 1922 году совмещал посты генерального секретаря ЦК РКПБ и Народного комиссара по делам национальностей, предложил строить страну на принципах автономизации. То есть...
It's a complete lie. There was no autonomy for regions in the Soviet Union. We all know that. Everyone knows that. Like there may be some local governance to an extent, but most of everything pretty much was controlled centrally. That was one of the big economic problems of the Soviet Union. The central economy is what killed it, and that's the fact.
Предоставляя республикам, будущим административно-территориальным единицам, широкие полномочия при их вступлении в единое государство.
Yeah, so he's referring here that the countries on paper, this is untrue. On paper, the republics had actually an option to freely leave the Soviet states. Well, let's just say it was not as accurate to what it was saying in the paper. On the paper, it was not a very democratic society where they actually could choose for themselves.
Ленин раскритиковал этот план и предложил пойти на уступки националистам, как он их тогда называл, независимцам. Именно эти ленинские идеи, по сути, конфедеративного государственного устройства и лозунг о праве нации на самоопределение вплоть до отделения и были положены в основу советской государственности. Сначала в 1922 году закреплены в Декларации об образовании.
So he's basically saying what they did is, in my opinion, wrong. But the cultural fact is that they did it. He might think it's wrong. It's a one-person opinion, one person's opinion.
Образование Союза СССР, а затем после смерти Ленина и в Конституции СССР 1924 года. Здесь сразу же возникает много вопросов. И первый из них, на самом деле главный. Зачем надо было с барского плеча удовлетворять любые безгранично растущие националистические амбиции на окраинах бывшей империи?
So again, this is a complete mix-up. He's talking about the empire, but the Soviet Union wanted to be as far from empire as possible. Like one of the reasons to creation of the Soviet Union was the saying that empire does not work. We need to go over from the Russian Empire. So him saying that, like, but the Soviet Union, they just wanted to reform the empire, but they reformed it wrongly, is a complete non sequitur. There is no sequentiality in the reforming an empire. Soviet Unions wanted to essentially build a whole new state, and they did. When Putin does a side, you know he's about to. So yeah, that's true. But it's not a continuation of the Soviet of the Russian Empire. The Soviet Union was not a continuation of the Russian Empire. It was a completely different state with a completely different system with a completely different mechanisms. It was built on a lot of the different principles and more importantly ideology. I might hate that ideology or not like it or be kinda okay with this or maybe love it a lot. It does not matter. My opinion to that is completely irrelevant to what they actually did. And what they actually did is they broke away from the empire and they said this did not work for everyone, because the people back then supported also a lot of the Soviet revolution. And they said this doesn't work for us, therefore we break away from that state that we were in. There was no discussion about why the nationalists. Well, because the empire didn't work. And then again, it doesn't matter what it was or was
Передавать
not.
во вновь образуемые, причем часто произвольно сформированные административные единицы Союзной Республики, огромные, часто не имевшие к ним вообще никакого отношения территории. Повторяю, передавать вместе с населением и...
Most of the territories were pretty accurate. Let's put it this way. As we exited the Soviet Union, and that, well, I mean, as we exited the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and we saw the lands being formed, a best example is Kaliningrad. That's the best example. So, did you know that Kaliningrad, that is Königsberg, by German Königsberg, that was used to be, and it is now an exclave for the Russia. It was offered both to Poland and to Lithuania to join their administrative region and say, hey, this is land, you are close by, you need to govern it. Both Lithuanian governance and the Polish governance said, no, thank you. We have what's ours. Roughly. There's a tighter history there. But the point is, the existence of an exclave of the Russians is strictly contradicting what is he saying. If it was from the will of the governance of those regions, that they said, no, we have our local regions. That's it. Again, it doesn't matter how they were tried. It was a matter of what they were discussing post-end. We see that countries that exited the Soviet Union, think about this way, like the Baltics could have between each other talked about the disputed land borders if they thought that, for example, that the land they got from one of the states, or like, for example, Lithuania, Poland, if Poland would say, well, Lithuania, you know, there is this land that was essentially given to you by the Soviet Union, I think it's ours, but we don't see that. We don't see border disputes of the post-Soviet countries. All post-Soviet countries more or less agreed, except for Armenia and Azerbaijan. But that is a whole another mess, and I'm not going to go in this video towards it. The point is, he is very much wrong on the precedent here.
Исторической России. Более того, по факту этим административным единицам придали статус и форму национально-государственных образований.
Because that's how states are made.
Вновь задаюсь вопросом, зачем надо было делать такие щедрые подарки, о которых самые ярые националисты раньше даже и не мечтали?
That was not a gift. That was not a gift. That was essentially the definition of the Soviet Union. They said the Soviet Union consists of, on paper, consists of autonomous republics, and it was a state of autonomous republics. That was how that conglomerate run. There is nothing that's saying that they were part of empire, and it was not a continuation of Russian Empire. Russian Empire stopped to exist.
Да еще и наделять республики правом выхода из состава единого государства. Без...
On paper, there was no chance to exit. That was all on paper.
всяких условий. На первый взгляд это вообще непонятно, безумие какое-то. Но это только на первый взгляд. Объяснение есть. После революции главной задачей большевиков было любой ценой удержаться у власти. Именно любой ценой. Ради этого они шли на все. И на унизительные условия Брестского мира, в то время, когда кайзеровская Германия и ее союзники находились в тяжелейшем военном и экономическом положении, а исход Первой мировой войны был фактически предрешен. И на удовлетворение любых требований, любых хотелок со стороны националистов внутри страны. С точки зрения исторических судеб России и ее народов, ленинские принципы государственного строительства
Mistake in his vision, it doesn't matter if it was a mistake or not. The countries exist not to be perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect state. What one considers a mistake might be considered perfectly fine for the other. That is why the Russian Empire broke. It was not working for a lot of people. Hence, Soviet Union rose in its place. Was it a mistake or not? Was it a mistake of the Soviet Union or was it a mistake of the Russian Empire? Was it a mistake of the Russian Federation right now trying to aggressively expand? Is it a mistake that's going to lead to the breakdown of the Russian Federation? It can. Will it? We don't know. But does it mean that it's completely seen as a mistake? If Russia is going to break down, will Putin then say, come out, oh, you know, it was a mistake, let's just kind of go back? Maybe let's call a next guy, he's then just going to invade those other breakaway countries, and then we're going to put them all back together.
Оказались не просто ошибкой. Это было, как говорится, гораздо хуже, чем ошибка. После развала СССР в 1991 году
So dissolution of the USSR, it's important to know here the words. So in Russian, he's using the words razval, which means the breakup. Well, not the breakup, but how do you say, there is like a semantic translation is needed. So he's saying like crumbling, like a crumbling of the Soviet, like crumbling and dissemination. Dissemination, there we go. So dissemination. So it almost emphasizes that there has been like some force. It's not that the regions and countries, they didn't want to be part of it, and therefore they agreed all together, including the Russian Federation that formed that year, that they all agreed that the Soviet Union is not working for them, therefore none. Like we don't want to. So it's very funny for him now to say that it was supposedly some other force that was acting on it and said like break down all of you, which is not true.
Это стало абсолютно очевидным. Конечно, события
So the Chechnya, so Chechnya is a very interesting case. I actually think because it's very much missed in the Western part of the society. It's a big thing that is often comes to discussion in a lot of Russian-speaking forums. Not so much in the Western area of influence. Sometimes it's compared to Ukraine, but it was a difficult situation. Mostly because the fight that Chechens were fighting was mostly partisan fighting, like guerrilla fighting, and beyond that, very often they fought also against the people in the territory of Russia. So they would take hostages to make demands. So they used actual terrorist tactics. So there is actually, it's a lot murkier, that water. But I'm not going to make any statements. I think Chechnya has the right to autonomy, as with all the nations within Russia, because Russia is still an empire, and I think if there is significant push from some nations within Russia against empire, they should have awaited opportunity to do so. They should have, well, I'm a social democrat, so for me, like if there is a legal, transparent elections, for example, or a referendum of the people that is confirmed and we know that it's true, and people do say, like, for example, Scottish independent, you know, this IndyRef that happened in UK, and I'm pretty sure it was quite honest, and Scots said, no, we don't want to be a part of the union. But there was nothing wrong with this. It was still a very nice and democratic process that led up to it. I don't think that it should be repeated. That would be like an argument, you just had it, right? Maybe at least make it once per generation if you really want it. But the fact is that, like, the same way as UK has the right to quit the European Union, they do have the right. I might not like it, or maybe love it, I don't know, but mostly I probably don't like it that much because it hurt both the UK and EU. But I cannot deny the will of the people, and a lot of people in UK, a will to have more autonomy to themselves. And that is a right that every country should have, or a nation. So it's very dishonest of what he's stating here. And Chechnya, it's been pacified. The people there are now living in one of the worst regimes in the world. I would say even worse than North Korea, because they're living with like no hopes. If people in North Korea, then at least they can maybe try to escape somewhere abroad. Escaping Chechnya is very hard, and even if some people escape, usually it comes with essentially severing connection to your family, and very often the families are getting killed because some of their people from those families escape, for example, to Europe. And it was not a raised question for a long time.
Прошлого уже не изменить, но мы должны хотя бы сказать о них прямо и честно, без всяких оговорок, да и без всякой политической окраски. Могу от себя только добавить, что соображения текущей политической конъюнктуры, какими бы эффектными, выигрышными они ни казались в конкретный момент времени, ни при каких обстоятельствах не должны и не могут быть положены в основу базовых принципов государственности.
What he says is a gibberish. He's saying that because there is political conjecture, therefore it shouldn't be made as a state of the country. It doesn't matter. What he's saying essentially is gibberish.
Никого и ни в чем сейчас не обвиняю. Обстановка в стране в то время и после гражданской войны, накануне, была невероятно сложной, критической. Сегодня хочу только сказать о том...
Not Tuva. Ukrainians like to joke the Belgorod People's Republic. That's the joke Ukrainians making.
Что все было именно так. Это исторический факт. Собственно, как...
Yeah, so the point of historical fact that it happened and there is no changing it. That's basically the definition of the historical fact. So all his monologues so far, just, well, things happened. Like the history wasn't perfect. The history wasn't as I imagined it. That's basically what he said.
Как уже сказал, в результате большевистской политики и возникла советская Украина, которую и в наши дни можно с полным основанием назвать Украина имени Владимира
Lenin's Ukraine. I'm going to just remind you that it's the Russian forces that are coming into Ukraine with the Soviet flags on their vehicles. Funny thing that.
Ильича Ленина. Он ее автор и архитектор.
Doesn't matter. The country is still there. It's been recognized internally. It doesn't matter if it was recognized by Lenin or whoever. A lot of the countries, India, Pakistan, were technically fake countries by this definition, but now we're treating them like real countries. People from there have actual rights. We might not completely agree with the political systems and the ways that they are solving, and we might not agree with how they are seeking their allies, and they are not confirming to our Western will of a just world, but they have a right for it because they're independent countries. It doesn't matter. So all of his statements so far account to nothing.
Это целиком и полностью подтверждается архивными документами, включая жесткие ленинские директивы по Донбассу, которые буквально втиснули в состав Украины. А сейчас благодарные потомки посносили на Украине памятники Ленину. Это у них декоммунизация называется. Вы хотите декоммунизации? Ну что же, нас это вполне устраивает. Но не нужно, что называется, останавливаться на полпути. Мы готовы показать вам, что значит для Украины настоящая декоммунизация.
So the actual decommunization is when you drive into the other countries. Like the actual decommunization is like when a country is dropping down the monuments to Lenin, and then your army drives into that country with waving Soviet flags, and then put again the monuments to the Soviet leaders. Decommunization. Also here he's so full of himself. Like when you hear his intonations, it's like he's like, we're gonna show you.
Коммунизация. Возвращаясь к истории вопроса, повторю, что в 1922 году на пространстве бывшей Российской империи был образован СССР. Но сама жизнь сразу же показала, что не сохранить такую огромную и сложную территорию, не управлять ею на предложенных аморфных, фактически конфедеративных принципах просто невозможно. Они были напрочь оторваны и от действительности, и от исторической традиции. Закономерно, что красный террор и быстрый переход к сталинской диктатуре, господство коммунистической идеологии и монополия Компартии на власть, национализация и плановая система.
It's very funny that he's talking about the Red Terror, and he's basically right now doing Russian terror in Ukraine, and kind of it's okay, it's fine.
Народного хозяйства, все это на деле превратило в простую декларацию, в формальность, заявленные, но не работающие принципы государственного устройства. Никаких суверенных прав в реальности у союзных республик так и не возникло. Их попросту не было. А на практике было создано строго централизованное, абсолютно унитарное по своему характеру государство. Сталин по факту полностью реализовал на практике не ленинские, а именно свои, собственные идеи.
If Lenin created Ukraine and Stalin ruled on top of it the way he wanted, does that mean that he approved of Lenin creating Ukraine or not? A question.
И государственного устройства. Но соответствующих изменений в системообразующие документы в Конституцию страны не внес. Провозглашенные ленинские принципы построения СССР формально не пересматривал. Да, судя по всему, казалось, что в этом и не было необходимости. В условиях тоталитарного режима и так все работало, а внешне выглядело красиво, привлекательно и даже светло.
He actually describes current Russia right now. That's like externally it looks like that everything is working just fine, and it's all nice and good, and the ruble is stable, so.
Сверхдемократично. И все же жаль. Очень жаль, что из базовых, формально-юридических основ, на которых была построена вся наша государственность, не были своевременно вычищены одиозные, утопичные, навеянные революцией, но абсолютно разрушительные для любой нормальной страны фантазии.
I mean, here he basically denounces the Soviet ideology. So basically he says the Soviet Union was really nice and authoritarian, and I really like that. What I don't like is that there was ideology in the Soviet Union. Well, he's stating this. I'm just kind of summing up. So he doesn't really like that there was this ideology about the potential utopia and actual benefit for the people. You know, one of the big dreams that the socialists and the Soviets had was that they had the dream scenario for the Soviet Union where they would have their own freedom and everyone would have everything that they want. And then second thing that he says, that unfortunately there was also documents in which the countries had some, not the countries, but the republics had some rights. So they shouldn't have rights. Yeah, John. Yeah, Ukraine was recognized. It's completely clear. But we're just trying to take apart whatever he is saying, right? This is basically mostly entertaining. We're not expecting to essentially debunk here any kind of logical statement. We're just having a good time discussing just how delusional this bold guy is, and that he's having his own opinion and stating it as a fact, whereas it's so full of holes. It doesn't even require me to open a new tab to Google or verify anything.
О будущем, как это часто бывало у нас и раньше, никто не подумал. Лидеры Компартии были, похоже, уверены, что им удалось сформировать прочную систему управления, что за счет своей политики они окончательно решили и национальный вопрос. Но фальсификации, подмена понятий, манипуляция общественным сознанием и обман дорого обходятся. Бацилла националистических амбиций никуда не делась.
So the problem is that the general public believes of this. I've explained a lot that Putin is a creation of, Putin is a creation of the Russian public, is as much as the Russian public is a creation of Putin. So they were in a shitty synthesis, like how do you say, like a positive feedback loop, is where Putin did something, like, for example, when Chechen war started, Putin said, we're going to kill everyone dead. And the Russians are, yeah, kill them all. And they signed basically at that moment that starting cycle. So then Putin says, okay, there has been like some opposition leaders on, like it was happened when Kursk sank. So Kursk sank, and then the mothers of the seamen on the Kursk submarine, they came in to demand some justification for what has happened, right? How did you as a president allow this to happen in our country? And what he said back then, there's two kind of takeaways from that. I didn't make a video on this because the video about Kursk research is actually available right here on YouTube. I've shared it in a video some time ago. If relevant, I will link it sometime or post it again in my community feed. But the idea is that they have this documentary about Kursk, and it has English subtitles. And in there, they explain that after this meeting with the widows of the Russian seamen, he then said, why did you bring all these whores that you ordered essentially to talk shit to me, right? This is something he said to representatives of the press, and people from the press had to essentially explain to him that no, these weren't like just women that we just hired, like these were not whores that we hired. And he said yes, they were, and he actually believed that. And the second thing is that after that, he started taking down the independent journalism. So they were starting to get hits on journalists, and society said, okay, well, they didn't follow up on it, right? The current police didn't investigate those cases close enough, and the society was, okay, it's fine. And secondly, the big takeaway for Putin was that the money matters, is when he said, okay, so your husband died, it's a big problem, I'll pay you. And he handed out a lot of compensations for the widows of the Kursk, and they did not demand any kind of justice beyond that. So instead of justice, he served compensation. And that is the lessons that he learned from that moment. A, that if there is no bad publicity, then there is less problems. And B, if there are problems, then pretty much just name the price. And because the societies agreed with that, like not every single one, I'm talking general Russian perspective, then there happened the situation with Medvedev. When Putin went away, Medvedev came in his place, and everyone saw through it. Everyone saw that it was like completely made up, that the elections were not fair. There was multiple falsifications. The protests came out, and then they were suppressed, the protests. And again, the Russian society just swallowed all of that. And every time they swallowed the Russian society, it was like a poison pill. It also started changing their own attitude, changing their own perspective, and so on. They were continuing to devalue their own life. There are multiple philosophers that are explaining this a lot better than I am. But the point is, by the fact that 2014 came in, the Russian society already was so much down the rabbit hole, that for them it was already completely clear that when he says Crimea is ours, despite all of them at the back of their heads having this small kind of notion that, yeah, I'm pretty sure it wasn't ours to take, but because there was no resistance and because there was such a weak response also from the external partners, they just, okay, so it is ours. Fuck everyone. And that solidified a lot of the mythos. And also the Georgia incident with that was also something. So there was a lot of these smaller steps that changed the society, the Russian society, and perspective that they had internally. I'm not saying that there are no opposition in the Russian society. There is. But most of the opposition in Russia is essentially, we're not opposing the empire that Russia is and how it works. We're just saying that we should have built a different empire. And that is the problem that I'm having a lot with a lot of the Russian opposition. But all in all, the Russian society, yes, they do believe it, despite that there is still a chance that they can come back. But for that to come back, it needs to be like a big shock. And a lot of the psychologists, like a mass psychologist that I'm listening to, they are saying that potentially a loss in this war, like the fact that they stop being unbeatable, might push them towards it. But it's not given a fact. Don't call me on that. Right now, it's Russian society is in a very, very dark place, and there is almost no good that is coming out of that. Every day of the war, that they're essentially not losing it. They're getting more and more deeper and deeper into that understanding that yes, what they're doing is just and right. Best clown, and yeah, definitely. Trump and Putin, yeah. Trump is a great example, right? It's the same idea, right? That there is still a lot of people that just believe, and it doesn't matter. Like, it's not about the facts anymore. It's when it becomes like essentially an identity. It is true for Trump. It is true for anti-vaxxers. It is true for flat earthers. It's the magical thinking. It's the idea that if we believe and think about something truly enough, and there's more people than, like, I don't know, 100 that believes it, it's a cult. But it's a very big cult. And if it's a very big cult, well, how can so many people be wrong? Which is a completely false statement. It's flawed to so many levels. It's hard to explain. But this is how essentially the public unconscious is.
А изначально заложенная мина, подрывающая государственный иммунитет против заразы национализма, только ждала своего часа. Такой миной, повторю, было право выхода из СССР. В середине 1980-х годов, на фоне нарастающих социально-экономических проблем, очевидного кризиса плановой экономики, национальный вопрос, сутью которого были не какие-то ожидания и не сбывшиеся чаяния народов Союза, а прежде всего растущие аппетиты местных элит, все более обострялся. Однако руководство КПСС вместо глубокого анализа ситуации, принятия адекватных мер, в первую очередь в экономике, а также постепенной, вдумчивой, взвешенной трансформации.
His country is so in shit, economically wise. Like, thankfully, economy is something that I can speak about a little bit more concrete. But his country is so deep in shit in economy, and he's been making so many decisions that were counter to any economy. It's actually hilarious to hear him, like, put the words through his mouth about how someone else have not been doing a great job about economy.
Политической системы и государственного устройства ограничилась откровенным словоблудием о восстановлении ленинского принципа национального самоопределения. Более того, в ходе развернувшейся борьбы за власть внутри самой Компартии, каждая из противоборствующих сторон с целью расширить базу поддержки стала бездумно стимулировать, поощрять националистические настроения. Играть на них, обещая своим потенциальным сторонникам.
He's talking about the freedoms, like the freedoms of press that happened around the end of the 1980s, so-called glasnost. It was about the fact that you actually can have a freer press, that it's actually okay to speak your national language because there was a lot of subjugated people. And he's saying that no, we should not have let people speak their language, and we should not have given freedom of the press or expression. That's what he's saying openly.
Все, что они только пожелают. На фоне поверхностной и популистской болтовни о демократии и светлом будущем, построенном на базе то ли рыночной, то ли плановой экономики, но в условиях реального обнищания людей и тотального дефицита никто из властьпридержащих и не думал о неизбежных, трагических для страны последствиях. А затем и вовсе пошли протаренные на заре создания СССР дорожкой удовлетворения амбиций националистических элит, выращенных в собственных партийных рядах. Позабыв при этом, что в руках у КПСС нет уже, да и слава богу, таких инструментов.
So he's saying, well, there wasn't a Stalin for them. So there wasn't like an autocrat that could kill the opposition right where it was. Again, this is what he's saying. Like, I don't even have to comment or Google anything. He's just saying it all himself. It's like, well, there was so much freedom that was appearing in the Soviet Union for the people inside Soviet Union. That is not something we can allow. There should have been a Stalin that would kill people while they just started. It should have made people more afraid. What an amazing leader. What a glorious national leader we're speaking about here.
Удержания власти и самой страны как государственный террор, диктатура сталинского типа. И что даже пресловутая руководящая роль партии, как утренний туман, бесследно исчезает прямо у них на глазах. И вот в сентябре 1989 года на пленуме ЦК КПСС был принят, по сути, роковой документ. Так называемая национальная политика партии в современных условиях, платформа КПСС. Она содержала следующее положение, процитирую. Союзным республикам принадлежат все права, отвечающие их статусу суверенных социалистических государств. Еще один пункт. Высшие представительные органы власти союзных республик могут опротестовать и приостановить действия постановлений и распоряжений союзного правительства на своей территории. И, наконец, каждая союзная республика имеет свое гражданство, которое распространяется на всех ее жителей. Разве не очевидно было, к чему приведут подобные формулировки и решения? Сейчас не время, не место вдаваться в вопросы государственного или конституционного права, давать определение самому понятию гражданства. Но все же возникает вопрос, зачем в тех и без того сложных условиях понадобилось таким образом еще больше раскачивать страну? Факт остается фактом. Еще за 2 года до развала СССР его судьба была фактически предрешена.
Talking about the Soviet Union, which current Russian Federation is not a continuation of the Soviet Union.
Это сейчас радикалы и националисты, в том числе и прежде всего на Украине, приписывают себе заслугу завоевания независимости. Как мы видим, это совсем не так.
Okay, so, well, he just said it himself. So the nationalists that are saying that Ukraine broke away from the Russia have nothing to do with it. It was the incompetence of the Soviet leadership. So that means that nationalists in Ukraine don't really have any kind of political power? Maybe? I'm just waiting this, I'm building this up because I'm pretty sure somewhere down the line there will be a point about how nationalists right now are running Ukraine.
Нашей единой страны привели исторические, стратегические ошибки лидеров большевиков, руководства КПСС, допущенные в разное время в государственном строительстве, экономической и национальной политике.
Like the countries were so free that while they were under hard dictatorship, no one wanted to go anywhere. But as soon as we actually asked them, everyone said that like let's end this right now. So free.
Распад исторической России под названием СССР на их совести.
Historic Russia is not SSR. USSR was not Russia. This is the fallacy. Like, so we've talked a lot about. So most of these were phantom pains of his, right? But here we come to the actual first factual, like complete lie, factual lie, right? He here basically underscores that USSR is Russia, Russia is USSR. That is not true. It was not true when USSR formed. It is not true now. It was not true after USSR collapsed, and all the countries that formed after that signed agreements between each other, recognizing their own independent borders. And people within these countries formed around the idea of national state. So this is actually the first fact that we wholeheartedly can say that Putin expressed in this speech and was completely wrong about.
Несмотря на все эти несправедливости, обман и откровенный грабеж России, наш народ, именно народ, признал новые геополитические реалии, возникшие после распада СССР, признал новые независимые государства.
I'll remind you that after USSR collapse, the Russian Federation remained the largest and the biggest country on the post-Soviet sphere. He's telling here that basically nothing was left after the Soviet Union dissolution, which is factually, again, not true, because Russia is huge. How much territory Russia has, how much people Russia has, it's so much more than any other state. I think that the next biggest one is Kazakhstan, but most of it is like steppes and wasteland. And Russia has everything: resources, forests, nature, everything. From one end to another, it's it's stretching over multiple continents. You give this country to some other leaders that are living like Netherlands. Like, they live in this small piece of land. Well, I'm sorry, people from Netherlands. I'm not trying to piss on you. I'm just saying that there are countries that would love to have some extra space to expand. Russia didn't came out as a loser. It came out as the biggest thing there is. There's plenty for over 140 million people that Russians are. Now a little bit less thanks to Ukrainian army.
И не только признал. Россия сама, находясь тогда в труднейшем положении, помогала партнерам по СНГ, в том числе украинским коллегам.
So CIS was a community of independent states. It was essentially an agreement between Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, and I believe Kazakhstan, maybe not, that they agreed to essentially work together to have some kind of independent state partnership. Again, it was partnership. The fact that Russia did do something from essentially their own, like to do more to have this partnership rather than take care of their own people, was again the choice that the Russian made. This has nothing to do with Ukraine or Belarus being indebted for it to Russia. It was a community, not a community, but the, how do you say, cooperation treaty. It wasn't even like a big agreement, like a social, like a Soviet Union. It was mostly just an economic cooperation agreement. You can think about like a coal and steel community that EU had initially, except a lot shittier.
От которых прямо с момента провозглашения независимости стали поступать многочисленные запросы о материальной поддержке.
Yeah, what are parts? Yes, but again, what he wants can be achieved. It doesn't justify the fact that you're like, how do I put it? So there are countries that don't have access to the sea. Does it mean that they should go to war right now with their neighbors? to get access to the sea. They can. But is it right? I don't think it makes them right.
И наша страна оказывала такую поддержку с уважением к достоинству и суверенитету Украины.
Yes, okay, so he said the magic words, sovereignty of Ukraine. So that means he accepts that Ukraine is a sovereign state? Let's go.
По экспертным оценкам, которые подтверждаются простым подсчетом цен на наши энергии.
No, I think it's post-crystallization. If your idea that your country doesn't have warm water ports, you don't make a speech where for the first 15 minutes you speak about how Lenin created the state you want to invade. We don't really hear you, and that's so much at a time. Okay, sorry. I'll try to pause Mr. Putin every time I will speak. It's actually a lot to ask. He's a president of Russia. I'm not in a position to make fun of him. I'm a guy on YouTube. That's not nearly enough status to be able to interrupt Mr. Putin here.
Энергоносители, объемов льготных кредитов, экономических и торговых преференций, которые Россия предоставляла Украине. Общая выгода для украинского бюджета на период с 1991 по 2013 годы.
Yes, trading is profitable. Trading is profitable. If you would compare how EU has grown, like people have compared, there are economists that made, if you would consider how much economic value the countries have gained because they were trading and not fighting each other, it's huge. Maybe Putin should do more trading rather than fighting.
Составило порядка 250 миллиардов долларов.
So Matthias is writing that he's from Switzerland. I think yes. So because you're Swiss, so you have options. Because like if I'm not wrong, you have like 3 main languages or even 4. So correct me on that. I actually would like to know if it's 3 or 4. And those are like Italian, French, and German, right? I think you have options. So Italy seems like a best 4. Yeah, perfect. So Italy seems like the best way forward because like the way to get to the sea is the fastest, and also it's warmer there. And also Italy is fucked politically, so you might as well just go in. But if you kind of go to France, there's also nice views and there's like some, you know, French stuff, nice castles, I guess. Germany, I mean, it's Germany. They have gas problems. Don't go to Germany. Okay, jokes. Don't invade other countries for access to the sea.
Но и это
Get them indebted to you, then buy the shit out of them.
далеко не все. К концу 1991 года долговые обязательства СССР перед иностранными государствами и международными фондами составляли порядка 100 миллиардов долларов. И первоначально предполагалось, что эти кредиты будут возвращаться всеми республиками бывшего СССР солидарно, пропорционально их экономическому потенциалу. Однако Россия взяла на себя погашение всего советского долга и полностью по нему рассчитала.
They did it willingly. They did it willingly. They said that Russia will be the continuation of the Soviet Union, therefore we're going to take over the Soviet debts. And most of those debts were forgiven. That has nothing to do with the thing. And a lot of those debts were essentially debts to allies that helped the Soviets win the war, such as Lend-Lease. Surprising, right? So he doesn't speak what kind of debts is he talking about. What have Russia been indebted to?
Считалось. Окончательно завершила этот процесс в 2017 году. Взамен новые независимые государства должны были отказаться от своей части советских зарубежных активов, и соответствующие соглашения в декабре 1990.
Like how he says that Russia had to give away all their Soviet assets, but then Russia also keeps Kaliningrad.
1994 года были достигнуты с Украиной. Однако Киев эти соглашения не ратифицировал. И позднее просто отказался исполнять, выдвигая претензии на алмазный фонд, золотой запас, а также имущество и другие активы бывшего СССР за рубежом. И все же, несмотря на известные проблемы, Россия всегда сотрудничала с Украиной открыто, честно и, повторю, с уважением к ее интересам.
Okay, but what he's saying is that we worked with Ukraine nicely and honestly, and because it was a, how do you say, like it was a mutual partnership, so I'm expecting that Ukraine also worked with Russia respectively.
Наши связи в самых разных областях развивались. Так, в 2011 году двусторонний торговый оборот превысил 50 миллиардов.
Trading is good, makes you rich. Don't attack the country that you're trading with. Then you will have 50 billions more. Now Ukraine is getting 50 billions in weapon supplies.
Долларов.
Fight you.
Замечу, что объем торговли Украины со всеми странами Евросоюза в 2019 году, то есть еще до пандемии, уступал этому показателю. Вместе с тем бросалось в глаза, что украинские власти предпочитали действовать так, чтобы в отношениях с Россией иметь все права и преимущества, но не нести при этом никаких обязательств. Вместо партнерства стало превалировать иждивенчество.
For that, we have legislation. Whenever the parties that have negotiated a contract are disagreeing with the contract, especially we have international legislation. So whenever there is parties that are justifiably disagreeing about certain aspects of the contract and the deal that they've made, and either the deal is not being executed factually or not being executed in good faith, they have the chance to turn to the either international court or whatever jurisdiction is being discussed in the stated contract. If you do not have that clause, then you don't know what contract is. There are things that are known to be regulated. Whatever the cause of the contracts and the disagreements between the contracts, it is then for the countries to evaluate if they want to continue cooperation after that. If Ukraine was such a bad provider of the Russian gas, Russia already built the Nord Stream project. It could have built the Nord Stream 2 project and eventually stop using I'm talking about gas because gas is pretty much the biggest economic asset the Russians are having. And I'm considering that he's talking about the gas wars that Ukraine and Russia had around 2000s to 2010s. And the important part is that there is international law that is regulating the contracts. There is a way to get compensation for the losses you endured if the contract was not followed as intended or in good faith. The fact that Russia is not doing that and instead says, well, then we're going to invade you is not just justification, it's a idiocy. You don't burn down the car that you just leased to someone and that he missed a leasing period. That's dumb. Putin is dumb.
Которая со стороны киевских официальных властей подчас приобретала абсолютно бесцеремонный характер. Достаточно вспомнить перманентный шантаж в сфере энергетического транзита.
Okay, so there was not a good agreement with the Ukrainians. They were not acting in good faith. Perfect. Stop working with them. Get them, sue their asses. Work directly with Germany. Build another Nord Stream.
И банальное воровство газа. Добавлю, что в Киеве пытались использовать диалог с Россией как предлог для торга с Западом. Шантажировали его сближением с Москвой, выбивая для себя преференции. Мол, в противном случае будет расти российское влияние.
Okay, I think we're coming close to the second thing that it's not really factually wrong. it's something that is again the Putin's internal pain, and it's a presumption that is untrue. And the presumption is because Ukraine used to be close with Russia, it should be close with Russia. So if we had good relationship and we traded a lot, that means we should have in the future good relationship and trade a lot. That is not true. Relationships are hard, especially with the neighbors. Look at Europe. We've been killing ourselves, each other, ourselves maybe not so much unless we're Lithuanian, but we've been killing each other for thousands of years. Like every country in Europe has some axe to grind with the country next to it. Relationships are hard. I don't like Orban one bit, but he's still in the European Union. He's making decisions on our foreign policy. And this is called dialogue. That's why we're human. That because we can speak to each other and we can negotiate and reason. That's what makes us better than, I don't know, pack animals. I don't even know how to state this in a manner that would underscore the actual situation that Ukraine is an independent state and it has the right to choose their own friends and their own relationships, how close they want to be in one relationships or the other. There are plenty of other countries around Russia that chose to work with other countries. Putin here is making a special pleading case for Ukraine, that Ukraine should be trading with Russia, but he hasn't justified that claim one bit. Why is that? The reasoning being, used to be part of the Soviet Empire, then Lenin came, and now it's not part of the Soviet Empire.
Влияние на Украине. При этом
we know that it's smokescreen, right? Obviously, it's just, I feel that it's important to speak through this and actually, I mean, we're having fun here. We're talking, it's a live stream. I'm reading your questions. Also, ask questions about the channel if you want or whatever. It's just for us to have fun and to see if I am good enough as a person that can hold people's attention for streaming, because I've never did really streaming before. And again, I'm not very good at public speaking. But then again, there is not that much public around here. It's just me, Wall, and Mr. Putin around here.
Украинские власти изначально, хочу это подчеркнуть, именно с первых шагов стали строить свою государственность на отрицании всего, что нас объединяет. Стремились исковеркать сознание, историческую память миллионов людей, целых поколений, живущих на Украине. Неудивительно, что украинское общество столкнулось с ростом крайнего национализма, который быстро приобрел форму агрессивной.
Okay, I was wondering when. So we already a little bit touched about the far-right nationalism, and this is actually will take us to Google things, because I think this is important, because the far-right nationalism, it's mostly, I think it's used both in the sense that it's used by the Russian-speaking population and pro-Russian shills in the West that we're having here. So one of the biggest thing is that Ukraine is Nazi, therefore Putin has the right to invade. That's apparently that's how the argument stands. And there are two premises. Well, firstly, can a country have ideology that it wants? Yes. Yes, it can. As a good example, I always talk about Hungary, because I personally don't like very much Viktor Orban. I don't enjoy the direction he's taking Hungary and the European Union. He's being very protective and nationalistic, and we already know that he has some issues with the race theory when it comes to mixing races in Europe. A lot of those arguments can be viewed in certain lines as nationalistic. Can there be people in a country that are more extreme, like extreme right, extreme left. Yes, that's the nature of democracies. In democracies, we have people that are all over the spectrum. There are people that are fascist. There are people that are completely like center, that don't care maybe that much. And then there are people that really want us to have maybe a social paradise. Can Hungary be kicked out of EU? There is no clause of removing a country from EU. The country should withdraw themselves. That's the only clause there is in the EU policies. As far as I'm aware, there is no procedure of kicking a country out of the EU. Turkey should be kicked out of NATO. Maybe. I don't think that right now, like NATO is primarily a military alliance, and Turkey is performing within the boundaries of the military alliance. And I think Turkey might get kicked out, but I think right now other countries are seeing that they have a lot of leverage against Turkey because Turkish economy is very much suffering and is very dependent on what's happening in the world. Even if they don't comply with EU values, yes, because EU is a democratic system, and while we have stated values, it's mostly it's not a dogma. Like the idea is that we are also an evolving project. So the perception of what are European values can be renegotiated, and Hungary is just a force that is driving the other direction. Yes, so what I was telling about is that can nations have their own ideologies? Yes. Can there be people that are exploring the ideology that is not likable or something that you agree with? Yes. So why is fascist bad? Let's talk about the main point here. Why is fascist bad? Well, because we had a precedent in history where a fascist dictator came to power and was able to engage society in a way that brought a great conflict and a lot of deaths on the European continent. So the countries can slide into fascism, and there is a certain gradation to it. And what we know about Ukraine is there we go. Let's start with Wikipedia. So far-right politics in Ukraine. So far-right has a history in Ukraine that happened during the Second World War, where they had the battalions of nationalists that were not very friendly towards the Jews. I guess that's the biggest kind of the argument, because right now there's been a lot of discussion about their roles, and for me kind of the biggest thing that does not justify Bandera's action, because we can justify a lot of the things that Bandera maybe fought for, in the sense that he fought against the Soviets or that he fought against the Germans, and he was actually imprisoned by the Germans, I mean the Nazis. But the killing of the Jews is not something that we can dismiss. So there was definitely a lot of the really bad blood in that. So that's why I think that it cannot be fully dismissed, the history of the Ukrainian nationalism. And that is fair. That is fair. I think Ukrainian nationalism is a thing that we should be aware of, but we also should be very factual to what is the support for it. I'm trying to see if I can find the election results. Support election, because that's the most telling. Oh, there is something from 2019. So the article from 2019 is saying that the far right just got humiliated in Ukraine's election, but don't write it off just yet. Okay. Results came in today. Parliaments, yada yada. The victor was never enough. Volodymyr Zelensky, servant of the people. So Volodymyr Zelensky was a centrist candidate, and he ran against the nationalistic Poroshenko candidate. That was the Poroshenko. And all this is just to underscore that the general society in Ukraine was never supporting nationalism to an extent that it became a normalized part in the society. Are there some fucked up groups that are supporting nationalism? Yes. Are there people that are openly nationalistic and, for example, if they have the chance, they would still kill the Jews? Yes. Those people should be dealt with, and they've been dealt with. A great example of this is around 2014 when there was a lot of these, like one of the biggest things is obviously the Azov battalion. That is a lot of the pro-Russians talking points, and actually Westerners that are pro-Russians, they're also talking points, is that Azov battalion that came in during the invasion of 2014 when Russia invaded the country. Firstly, it is obvious that if there is no regular army that can defend the country, the first thing that's going to come rise to power is the movements of nationalists, the country's nationalists. That is just obvious. Have you ever been to the football match where there is a lot of ultras? They can tell you a thing about being passionate about some things. And most importantly is that Azov was one of the battalions that was built on the nationalist ideas. So right, we know all these guys. So with all the let me see, where's the most nationalistic image that I can show you, or sorry, Nazi image? Yeah, I guess this one. This. No, that's just the far-right movement that hates the Kremlin. That's not what I want. But you get the point. You see the pictures, right? So they had a lot of these symbolism. For me, symbolism doesn't matter that much. Like personally, there's plenty of people that are putting a lot of the value in their symbols. But I think more importantly is what kind of ideas they're bringing. One of the main ideas that Azov is bringing was the Ukrainian state. And they were the one that rose in 2014. And they were extremely far right. Like, they are full-blown Nazis. I think denying that is kind of dumb. The problem is, it's a very small part of the Ukrainian society. They became this, how do you say, like a candy, like the top candy that's something like a picture. It's like, oh, look, have you seen Azov? This is the whole Ukrainian society. It's not. The far-right candidates that run into elections for the political ideology of the far-right lose continuously. They gain 3-4% in the elections, max. And 3-4% in a country of 44 million is actually quite a lot of people. That's why they can form a whole battalion for Azov. Right? I'm not saying right now, because right now, because of the actions of Russia, they've been memorized as heroes of Mariupol, because they've stand to the last in Mariupol. And now the number of people that want to join the Azov is so large. But important here is how Azov changed past 2014. One of the big changes that was made, and it was a demand actually from the Western allies, from NATO and so on, was that there is a lot of forensic element, like there was a lot of free elements in the Ukrainian army, or how it was. There wasn't really army. It was more about like defenders and freewheeling battalions that were formed all over the country that tried to defend Ukraine in 2014. And Azov was one of them. And basically, it was a request after 2014, when the finally hostilities more or less stopped, that the Ukraine will incorporate all these free groups into the actual military, and they did. And one of the requirements for Azov battalion was to drop the political argument. They were basically ordered to, if you want to be part of the army, you're going to be part of the army. You're going to be as just a regular unit. Like, you might have your own unit traditions, which they still have. They still have the logo. That is very controversial, and I would ask, like, why do you need this? Like, why do you need the symbolism? Because it is so offensive. But I think they want to be offensive. They want to be in your face. because there is also a political part of the Azov that is not part of the Ukrainian military Azov, and they're speaking independently. Very often, this political party that is referred to is not even called Azov. It is called like the political party of the guy that used to create Azov some time ago, because he is not the part of the Ukrainian military. So the situation is a lot more complex, and there's a long talk to be had. And I would love to actually make a video if you think that it's relevant about it. But all in all, there can be people inside of Ukrainian military that have far-right views. We know there's plenty of far-right views in Russian military, but the justification to attack a whole country and bomb the people and kill the children and rape the women and destroy the cities by saying, you know, there is about 3% of your country that is nationalistic, therefore you all are, is beyond me. It's like saying that, you know, there is Hungary that is in the EU, and Viktor Orban, representing just part of the Hungary, has stated that there should not be any mixing of nationalities within EU. Therefore, the whole EU is stating that, well, the whole EU is then saying that it is racist and don't want to get mixing. You see the problem with this? It's the extension of a very small part, very loud part, one might say, like very much brought up by the Russian propaganda on top of the pile and picked up by a lot of the useful idiots in the West, that is not represented by the facts in the Ukrainian elections, that is not represented in the facts of any kind of common normal European person, and more importantly, not representing the facts of the people that were living in the east of Ukraine and were more leaning towards being more pro-Russian, such as people in Kharkiv. The fact that there are some percentage of people does not justify in any way killing of innocent civilians in any place on earth. That was a long monologue, actually. I don't think if it made sense or not, but I hope this underscores that Azov, it is there. It's a very small part of what the Ukrainian society actually represents. And all the elections have shown that if no one would interfere to Ukraine, then they would never come up even.
Русофобии и неонацизма. Отсюда и участие украинских националистов и неонацистов.
Good point about France. Like France, the runner-up in France presidential election is Marine Le Pen. Wasn't she very right-leaning? Does that mean that France is right-leaning? Nationalist.
В бандах террористов на Северном Кавказе. Все громче звучащие территориальные претензии к России. Свою роль сыграли и внешние.
I'm actually going to stop and talk about the France, because Matthias, I think you have something. Right, so in France and in a lot of other places, there is a lot of nationalistic parties that are gaining traction. What we need to understand that these parties are sponsored by Putin. They are getting extremely wealthy donations from Putin. They're getting more traction and more public time and coverage because they have the money from Russia. Because Europe pays money to Russia for gas, and then Russia takes that money and then sends it back to Europe to support the the right-leaning anti-EU parties. Europe has been paying for years to destroy itself. That is the stupidest decision that Germany has made and didn't want to recognize, because this, I'm not saying Germany, like as a people, I'm saying Merkel as a leader of Germany that was for this politics. And it never came on the agenda high enough always to become an actual discussion topic with the Germans, because it felt fine, right? Yeah, there are like Poland, Baltic states that are not friends with Russia, but who cares about them? They always don't, they never did like Russia. And now we are in a kind of, as Schultz said, well, how is it called? The turn of the tide. I forgot the word. Sorry.
Силы, которые с помощью разветвленной сети НКО и спецслужб выращивали на Украине свою клиентуру и продвигали ее представителей во власть. Важно понимать и то, что Украина, по сути, никогда не имела устойчивой традиции своей подлинной государственности. И, начиная с 1991 года, пошла по пути механического копирования чужих моделей, оторванных как от истории, так и от украинских реалий. Политические и государственные институты постоянно перекраивались в угоду быстро сформировавшихся кланов с их собственными корыстными интересами.
That is true. There has been a lot of oligarchs in Ukraine. The difference between Russian oligarchs and Ukrainian oligarchs is that Russian oligarchs were controlled by Putin, and that's why, for example, right now no oligarchs is speaking against Putin. Whereas Ukrainian oligarchs, they had their own spheres of influence, and they basically controlled parts of the country. It's not as true now as it was, but there is definitely some truth to this. There were definitely essentially clans. And this is actually, I think, where he thought that it would be very easy to capture Ukraine, because divide and conquer. And
не имеющими ничего общего с интересами народа Украины. Весь смысл так называемого прозападного цивилизационного выбора украинской олигархической.
And that is not true. So he's stating, basically, he's saying, well, because there were oligarchs in Ukraine, therefore that's what the people wanted, and because people wanted the Westerns, that means that the Westerns created the oligarchs. So here he basically, I think one of the things that we can already take out from this 20 minutes speech of Putin and what he said so far is that we definitely see that he does not believe in any kind of authority of the people to govern themselves. He always talks about the idea that there should be someone governing the people. Hopefully, the most is that it will be governed, like, by the strict hand, such as Stalin. And he basically, every time he's referring to someone having their own authority, he thinks that this is what brings troubles, and therefore there should always be essentially a leader. So he basically thinks that people are stupid, and people should never have anything to say about them. So they should not have any rights. There should always be someone who says it. And he never understood fundamentally Ukrainian society. Because while there are a lot of oligarchs in Ukraine, and a lot of those oligarchs were supported by a lot of people in Ukraine, and there were essentially clans, it did not remove that there has been some like not statehood, but some individual authority of Ukrainian people to govern themselves. Despite there being oligarchs, they still had an option to vote in elections, and they still had the choices they were making. Electing Zelensky is the biggest representation of that, because Poroshenko is an oligarch. He's a huge oligarch. He's having a very big clan. And Zelensky was a man of the people. He was a representative of the simple folk of Ukraine. So that's why election of Zelensky was such a big deal for democratic growth in Ukraine per se. We might not agree to everything that Zelensky said and promised that he will come into, because he was, for example, major platform was that he would stop the war and he would not fight Russia. But the fact is that they chose Zelensky instead of an oligarch. So the control of oligarchs was not as reasonable, but as stated. But I think in a Putin's mind, both the people in Ukraine are manipulated by oligarchs or someone from the darkness, like some dark cardinal. Or he thinks that Zelensky is just a puppet of some oligarch, despite we all now seeing very clearly that he's a man of his own. And this is very much consistent with what we are seeing and what his justification are is for denouncing Ukrainian statehood.
Власти заключался и заключается не в том, чтобы создать лучшие условия для благополучия народа, а в том, чтобы, подобострастно оказывая услуги геополитическим соперникам России, сохранить миллиарды долларов, украденные у украинцев и спрятанные олигархами на счетах в западных банках. Одни промышленные финансы.
Because we all know that Russian oligarchs are the richest people in the West. That they have the biggest riches hidden in the Western banks. That's very interesting for him to talk about Ukrainian ones.
Своей группы, взятые ими на содержание партии и политики, изначально опирались на националистов и радикалов. Другие на словах выступали за добрые отношения с Россией, за культурное и языковое многообразие. И приходили к власти с помощью голосов граждан, которые искренне поддерживали такие устремления, в том числе и миллионов жителей Юго-Востока. Но получив посты, должности, они тут же предавали своих избирателей, отказывались от своих предвыборных обещаний, а реальную политику проводили под диктовку радикалов.
He is describing Yanukovych, the person that supposedly in his mind is the legitimate president of Ukraine, the one that ordered to kill the protesters on Maidan. So it's very interesting that he's describing Yanukovych, because like Yanukovych's whole his argument that it was illegitimate what Ukrainians did on Maidan.
Подчас преследуя своих вчерашних союзников, те общественные организации, которые выступали за двуязычие, за сотрудничество с Россией. Пользовались тем, что люди, поддержавшие их, как правило, законопослушные, умеренных взглядов, привыкшие доверять власти, и они, в отличие от радикалов, не будут проявлять агрессию, прибегать к незаконным действиям. В свою очередь, радикалы наглели, их претензии год за годом росли. Им оказалось нетрудно раз за разом навязывать свою волю слабой власти, которая сама была поражена вирусом национализма и коррупции.
No. So this is interesting. I'm not sure what he like, because he's definitely extending the definition of nationalism. Because if we look at the Ukrainian elections and how they won, it was very often that there was a pro-Russian leader, then there was anti-Russian leader. The pro-Russian leader, then was their anti-Russian leader. The pro-Russian, it's a democracy. That is very normal for democracy to alternate. That it was almost on a pathway to like similar to the US system, where they have two-party system, almost like. It wasn't as, because there was more nuance to that, but it was definitely not true. And again, as I say, the nationalist parties, like far-right parties in Ukrainian elections, historically did very, very poorly. They barely had any votes. What he's referring to as nationalists is more of a people that wanted to go towards the West. So like you think about center-right, like so liberal democracy way. Whereas the pro-Russians would be like illiberal democracy, trying to be dependent on the Russian gas and oil and so on. Very corrupt, both of them though. Corruption is a big problem with Ukraine, but now Ukraine, because of the war, Ukraine has a chance to start over. But we're going to talk about this on like what would wait for us after the end of the war. It's a whole another big topic.
И искусно подменяла истинные культурные, экономические, социальные интересы народа, реальный суверенитет Украины разного рода спекуляциями на национальной почве и внешней этнографической атрибутикой. Устойчивой государственности на Украине так и не сложилось. А политические выборные процедуры служат лишь прикрытием, ширмой.
It's not his business. How stable or unstable certain country is not his deal. It's not his country. It's the country of Ukrainians. It is for them to decide how stable or unstable their country is. The fact that he doesn't like it, so what?
Для передела власти и собственности между различными олигархическими кланами. Коррупция, которая без сомнения является вызовом и проблемой для многих стран, в том числе и для России, на Украине приобрела какой-то уже особый характер. Она буквально пропитала, разъела украинскую государственность, всю систему, все ветви власти.
He thinks it did. This is one of his wrong assumptions for invading Ukraine, because he thought that there is no governance in Ukraine. So as soon as I come in with my forces, everyone's just going to run away like skitter. Who's wrong now?
Радикалы воспользовались справедливым недовольством людей, оседлали протест и в 2014 году довели Майдан до государственного переворота. При этом они получали прямое содействие со стороны зарубежных государств. По имеющимся данным, материальная поддержка так называемого протестного лагеря на площади Независимости в Киеве со стороны посольства США.
There were research done, there wasn't. There wasn't. Like, there just wasn't. It was very, very niche support, like essentially for people not to freeze. That's it. No one needed to. Yanukovych didn't need to fire at protesters. Maidan was almost over. If you remember the, I recommend watching I think it was Winter on Fire. There was a Netflix movie about the Maidan protest, but the protest was almost done. When the students that were protesting, because first it was the students that came out, because it's always students, they are the most kind of hot-blooded, and they wanted some change. But when the students got beat up by the police, that's when the main protest has started. And the main of the escalation was because that Yanukovych, instead of having some kind of negotiations or potential talks of how to de-escalate the situation, he just used more and more force. Yeah, Putin trolls the argument. So the argument stands for is like, well, it was an illegal protest. But here we need to understand what is the legal protest and so on, because when the protest is being shot at with live ammunition by the authority that just proclaimed that all these people are by default criminals, does that sound like a legal or illegal protest? Revolution is always a messy thing, right? Have not been revolution. The question is what is happening after the revolution. And after the revolution, we know that the situation stabilized. Obviously, there was the period when Russia nicely used this instability in the political system of the country to snatch the Crimea from Ukraine and then also invade Donbass, right? Because Ukraine didn't have any forces, Ukraine didn't have any stable government, and Putin is nice opportunist, right? There was no, like, Putin doesn't talk about, well, you know, it was so illegal. Like, no illegal protest allows you to invade the other country. This is the same situation as we were talking about the occupation by the Soviet Unions of Poland, Baltic states, and that sense, right? What they are stating is that, well, we came in to rescue the people from Donbass and people in Crimea. Well, why did you stay? If it was because there was a risk of maybe that some rampant nationalism would actually, I'm like, it's a complete bullshit. Like, it's such a bullshit argument that it's very hard to even take it seriously. But let's bear with me here. So if there is a risk for this, once the situation stabilized and there is a free and fair election that happened, then it becomes really problematic to express anything that was like, why is your army doing in the other country? There is no justification anywhere in the world that states that, oh, if there is an instability in a neighboring country, that means I can invade. There is not a lot, like any kind of justification right like this. So whatever is being used was opportunistic on the Russian part. They came in, they snatched, they kicked the Ukrainian military out, instead of working with them to protect from any kind of potential nationalist. And instead of leaving once the situation calmed down, they say like, oh, yes, we were the peacekeepers. Peacekeepers that never left. You know how they call peacekeepers that never left? Nazis. That's how they call them in Poland when Germany in 1939 there was an accident on the border. I'm not sure it was the Polish border guard. So like Germany, they kind of they built like this big military along the Polish border, and then the Polish started shooting at the Germans, and then to prevent that, like the Germans kind of had to intervene, right? They just needed to kind of come in with the Soviets from the other side and then for peace. So Poland is then peaced. So there is no justification for it. It doesn't matter if there is protest or so on. The country might burn itself to the ground or have civil fights. It does not give justification. Any kind of support from the leader of the country that just runs away to the neighboring country is a joke. I'm sorry, but this is like he has been ousted. After that, there was a vote in parliament, the same parliament, by the way, gotta say. Oh, it was Germans? No, it couldn't be Germans shooting at Germans. You're talking silly. So the point is, it's the nicest justification as a talking point, but there is no justification in international law that states, hey, we should just invade because there is instability in the other country. And usually when this comes in, the counter argument is, but US did. That was bad too. That was bad too.
Составляла $1 миллион в день. Дополнительные весьма крупные суммы в наглую переводились прямо на банковские счета лидеров оппозиции. И речь шла о десятках миллионов долларов. А сколько в итоге получили действительно пострадавшие люди? Семьи тех, кто погиб в столкновениях, спровоцированных на улицах и площадях Киева, в других городах. Об этом лучше не спрашивать. Радикалы, захватившие власть, организовали преследование, настоящий террор в отношении тех, кто выступал против антиконституционных действий. Над политиками, журналистами, общественными деятелями издевались, их публично унижали. Украинские города захлестнула волна погромов и насилия. Серия громких и безнаказанных убийств. Невозможно без содрогания вспоминать о страшной трагедии в Одессе, где участники...
Odessa. Okay, so this is a long talk. But I'm going to talk about Odessa and then I'm done for today because I already hear that my wife is coming back. She will want to use the room as well. As I said, I'm not a professional streamer. I don't have a studio. I'm sitting in my living room on a chair. I'm a guy on YouTube. So Odessa. So the important part, what was relevant about Odessa, it's one of the major arguments that is being said that Odessa is when the nationalists run rampant. So in Odessa, there was at that moment the Russians have started this series of protests that they heated up with some weapons around the Donbass area. That's when the Girkin came in. That's when a lot of the administrative buildings of Ukraine around the eastern area were overtaken, and where in Kharkiv the special forces of Russia weren't as successful because they didn't know where the administrative building of Kharkiv is. So they actually brought essentially the crowd to the building that wasn't the administrative building. I think it was the library or something else. Like it's a hilarious story. And they put the flag on top of that building. But they were more successful in the areas around Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. And Sloviansk was where it all basically started, where Girkin forces, and Girkin is a Russian FSB agent. That's very, very true. And they basically started doing like an actual secession conflict and giving out essentially the weapons and destroying the Ukrainian sovereignty. But in Odessa, they had this kind of meeting as well with some of the agents from Russia, and they came out. But there was also planned a counter protest at the same time. So the how do you say, the police forces didn't delimit those protests. Moreover, the Odessa was run by pro-Russian forces at that moment. Like the mayor and the police chief were very pro-Russian. So what happened is the police, instead of trying to separate those two crowds, they came in and started essentially escorting the people that were pro-Russian, and they were essentially escorting them towards the people that were against Russian. So it was almost they had to clash. They basically was navigated, and people that were pro-Russian, they actually came to this event very well prepared, and most importantly, they brought in the firearms. Like there's plenty of videos showing how the pro-Russians started using firearms. There is a question to be made that if those firearms were live ammunition or they were just traumatic firearms. That is not completely true because the video quality wasn't that great at that time. But we definitely know that the firearms were used by the pro-Russian protesters, and we know that there has been people that were injured and, if I believe, killed by the firearms, like live ammunition firearms at Odessa on the pro-Ukrainian side. Obviously, because it was still Odessa, the pro-Ukrainian side was still larger. So eventually the forces essentially clashed and slowly pushed each other towards the house where, I think it's like the house of, I forgot the name, Dom Proxayu it's called. It's essentially just like a big theater area. Think about like theater, like with multi-stories. And they got in, and they actually had prepared positions inside. They have fortifications and Molotov cocktails inside. And then what happened is basically two sides clashed, and one thrown Molotov cocktail, and it is unclear. There has not been a clear justification because we see Molotovs flying both from the building, like towards the crowds that were outside, the pro-Ukrainian ones, and towards the building that is flying towards the pro-Russians. So there is no clear understanding, because what might have happened is just some Molotov cocktails were just fell down inside, right? And it just spilled over. But we definitely know that there were Molotovs on those sides. And at some point that building started catching fire. And the building had a lot of the material that was very toxic inside. So it's like old carpets, like all of the other like basically the Soviet materials that were not very safe for fire hazards. And they released a lot of toxic clouds, and a lot of the people inside that building, once it caught fire, they pretty much almost instantly got asphyxiated with these toxic fumes. It was a very nasty accident, but we know that it was mostly to blame, like as the, how do you say, the research for that event ended up being saying, well, this was an accident, and the main problem is that the police didn't delimit the two clashing forces, despite knowing about this, and it was just the event where there's something just happened, right? There was no justification. It was definitely not how Russians put it, where peaceful, all-loving Russians just were sitting inside their house, and then Ukrainians just came in and threw Molotovs and everything burned down. And when they tried to escape by the windows, then the Ukrainians were pushing them back. No, what happened was completely the opposite. When the understanding came in that the house that the pro-Russian protesters were in caught fire, that moment there has been multiple reports of calls from the crowd, from pro-Ukrainian, saying, please come, the fire brigade, the building is on fire. And then there is also multiple video evidence showing how Ukrainians are actually trying, the pro-Ukrainian crowd is actually trying to climb the building to get people out of the building. But because there was these fumes, and because that building was such a shit, there has been so many deaths that just happened like this on an instant. It's a tragic accident, but it wasn't staged or specifically done with the purpose of killing pro-Russians. But Russian propaganda loved twisting it this way. And you know what's the best part? So the main kind of responsible for that part, the police chief of the Odessa, you know where he is now? In Russia. He is now hiding in Russia. The police chief that basically the investigation found the main kind of responsible for this event is in Russia. So if Putin really would like to have like an honest discussion about like who is responsible for the Odessa events, he should ask the police chief that allowed two, knowing that there was two very aggressive crowds coming into each other and not preventing that in time. And then this led to the tragic accident. This is what I know to the best of my knowledge. And I'm pretty sure there will be people from the Russian side coming and say, oh, but you forgot how they something like this. And then pro-Ukrainians can come in and say, well, yeah, but they were firing, I don't know, guns in the air and yelling how they're going to kill all the Ukrainians. Yes, that's called aggressive people. That's why it was critical for the police forces to delimit those two groups. And it didn't happen. And this led to tragedy. So I hope this clears out some of the Odessa story. And I guess we're slowly going to round up. We're going to continue next time from 24th minute. Wow, I am the slowest streamer ever. And I hope you at least had some fun. I'm going to see if I can make clips out of this stream, or you're welcome to make clips. And I'm going to be looking to make a video tomorrow for to be more optimistic, to give you perception of how this week, how the winter will come for Ukraine in a more positive light, because there has been a lot of really good news coming from pretty much everywhere. Like my pessimistic video is now so outdated just because there has been so much good news coming for Ukraine for the coming winter, and it seems that any kind of hopes that Russia had for a potential ending of this conflict on any kind of frozen conflict terms is pretty much closing, and closing very fast. Yeah, Odessa is completely pro-Ukrainian. Yeah. I mean, all the cities are all pro-Ukrainian. You cannot say that you're pro-Russian, that you are coming in to defend Russians and then bomb Kharkiv. You cannot do that. You cannot come in and kill people that even consider themselves leaning towards more pro-Russian. Putin is the biggest enemy of Putin. He's the person who completely ruined relationships and any kind of future good relationship possibilities between Russians and Ukrainians. He's the only one to blame. He himself and the people that didn't stop him in time. The people that were in charge of the military forces, people who were in charge in a circle around him, the oligarchs that had some influence on him, none of them did anything. Even the fucking propagandists, they had the chance to open their mouth and don't say that Ukrainians are subhumans, that all the people inside of territory in Ukraine should be cleansed. It is responsibility of this guy. Well, sorry. Yeah, that guy. There we go. No, I don't think the Russians would turn against him. I think that's unlikely. I already told that I'm glad to see that maybe with the bombing of Dugina that there might be resistance inside of Russia, because let's put it this way. Ceteris paribus, like if the situation is like this, there is no chance Russians will essentially rebel. The decrease in living standards is not a driver for change. It never was, and it never expected to be. So we should not expect a rebellion inside Russia. I think a lot of the people that saying that Russia is about to be overthrown are very naive. It might happen, I don't know, but as well as might happen is that Putin tomorrow is going to get struck by lightning. That's the same kind of weight for me. Yeah, actions. Actions speak louder than words. That's very true. Analog like telephones. Oh yeah. Putin doesn't have smartphone. Did you not know? Putin doesn't use smartphone. He doesn't believe in technology. He does not know how to use a smartphone. That was one of the big deals why Medvedev was so impressive for the Russians. When Medvedev, that's the dummy that they used in between the Putin's terms. When Medvedev came in and then Steve Jobs presented Medvedev with iPhone, that's actually was a big change for the Russians. They actually were so surprised that the president can use technology. Hey, good day for you as well. Cambodia is very nice. Yeah, but the point is like, but even by this day, the Medvedev, in Russia, they still calling him Dima iPhone. Like, that's how they call Medvedev. Yeah, collection for the poop. Yeah, he's a very paranoid. I think like the best theory I've heard about Putin is that he's a sociopath, but I'm not his psychologist. I'm not a medical expert. I don't have the card for his psychological evaluation, but he definitely lives in his own timeline. Cool. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope it was fun. I hope you will join some next session if we ever have that. Take care.